Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us this morning to discuss California Leaf's 2019 Social Equity Urban Forest Improvement Grant Program. This is the fourth cycle of this program since we started doing this a few years ago with the release of greenhouse gas reduction funds. We've got a very full agenda today, and we're going to keep things moving. My name is Chuck Mills. I'm the grants manager for California Reef. I also work on public policy, and I'm just going to quickly get us to the slide if I can get it advanced. Okay. I want to quickly introduce our co-hosts and partners that are going to be on the call today. With us from Greenlining Institute is Emmy Nguyen. She'll be talking in depth about the equity and community engagement components of what we're looking for in this grant program. Colleen Rabden is the founder of Urban Ecos. She'll be providing the technical assistance in terms of calculating greenhouse gas reductions for all grants that are awarded. In addition, she'll be preparing the estimates for all applicants, and she'll also be talking with you today about the best way to determine where to plant a tree, how to determine where it's located, and other information related to the program and the tree planting component thereof. And then finally, we have Matt Hannigan with the state of California, and he'll be discussing opportunities to partner with the state in tree planting through this program at state facilities throughout California in disadvantaged areas and other areas where there are tree planting opportunities. We've got a pretty long agenda, so I'm just going to keep moving forward. And then also I want to mention someone new to the grant program, Amelia Oliver. She is also here with California Relief, and she's going to be working with me on this grant, and she'll be facilitating the conversation after some initial introductory slides that I've prepared for us. So I'm going to keep rolling, or try. Okay. What we're talking about today is our 2019 program. We received an award through a competitive grant process from CAL FIRE just a couple of months ago, and that contains $800,000 to support urban forestry grants that reduce greenhouse gas. These funds do come from the California Climate Investment Program, and there are some criteria as listed here. 75% of the funds are going to support projects located in disadvantaged communities and low-income communities. This is per AB 1550 legislation that was passed a couple of years ago that ensures a proportional amount of funds are going to these two communities. And then all the projects must contain a significant tree planting component. And the reason I bring that up is that there are some grant programs, such as the Urban Greening Program, and even some grant programs within CAL FIRE where the tree planting component can be a bit more minimal. Ours has to be fairly significant because that is the only way that we're going to be able to calculate GHG reductions. And of course, these are smaller grants, so the focus is on tree planting. Going on next, what we're going to talk about today, of course, are the grant applications and overview. Everyone who's on the webinar should have gone to our website by now and looked at the materials that we have available to apply for our grant this year. Again, the applications are due November 30th with the intent to try to provide awards by the end of January. We're going to discuss a few grant writing tips, and then of course, as I mentioned, our partners are going to talk about other elements pertinent to the grant program, and then after each section, there'll be opportunities for questions and answers, and then at the very end, we'll have one last call for Q&A. So I'm going to continue moving forward. Right now, before we get too deep into the grants, I wanted to provide a couple of announcements that may be pertinent to folks on the call that are either in our network or even outside the California Relief Network. The first is discussion of the Urban and Community Forestry Grant Program through CAL FIRE. They were also awarded funds this year through the state budget. They were actually awarded two pots of funds, a little less than $5 million from the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund to support their program that has been going for the last 4 years. But then they also received a one-time funding of $13.5 million from Proposition 68, and this was the park bond that passed off the June 2018 ballot. So they're actually doing 2 separate calls for proposals. They'll be doing workshops beginning, I believe, just 2 weeks from today. And here's a little more information about the program. One of the things that we like to do with our grant program, and the reason that we have our smaller grant program, is that they're very focused on trying to provide an entree into the world of public grants and state funding for urban forestry. And our grants are hopefully not only serving the community in terms of tree planting and providing some social equity in terms of increased canopy, but also hopefully building capacity at the organization so that if you're new to this realm, you're going to be able to apply for our grant, and if you're successful, lessons learned from that will help you to apply for larger funding sources, such as a CAL FIRE's grant program, where they go up to $1.5 million. Urban Greening program goes even higher than that. So I encourage you to take a look at this if you want to look for more money in urban and community forestry. And then you'll note here at the bottom is there are no restrictions on applying to both our program, which is funded from 2018 dollars, and the urban forestry program through CAL FIRE that's out right now, which is funded through 2018 dollars in the 18-19 fiscal year. So there's no overlap in that regard. Another plug is that we've got some workshops coming up starting next week in Los Angeles. We're co-hosting that with Liberty Hill Foundation and Trust for Public Land. It's a great opportunity to learn not only more about this program, but other public funds that are available in urban greening, environmental justice, active transportation. There's going to be a booth there with agency representatives from Department of Parks and Recreation and other entities that receive funding from Prop 68. So it's a great opportunity if you're in the Southern California area to kind of do one-stop shopping and learn more about a lot of these state-funded programs. If you're in Northern California, next week we're going to be having a workshop solely on this program that we're going to be discussing today. We're going to do a deeper dive into it and discuss some of the intricacies about how this program would work in Northern California. And then finally, in partnership with Greenlining Institute, on the 22nd, we're going to be doing a much broader workshop that, again, is going to cover a lot of additional public funding opportunities while still discussing this program in depth and learning more about some critical legislation that passed this year that was sponsored by Greenlining Institute and Trust for Public Land relating to technical assistance at the regional level. So you can call or email me for more information, RSVP to any of these events, and we hope to see you there. I think our last plug is just a little heads up about our retreat that's coming up next year in Los Angeles. These have become increasingly popular. We're doing these every year, and I think the last one was in Oakland, and we hope to continue doing these, and we'll have more information as it comes out. And I'm being told by the staff that it wasn't Oakland, it was in Sacramento. Yeah, Oakland, Sacramento. Okay, so now, what are we going to be talking about today? Eligibility, again, most of this, if not all of it, can be found in the guidelines, which we've tried to streamline as much as possible, but we want to highlight a couple things here because there have been some changes to the program and there are some questions that invariably are not answered in the guidelines that we want to address today. First, a little focus on some of the changes from the past program. Like I said, we've been doing this I think this is our 4th grant cycle. This is the first one where we're really placing emphasis on shovel-ready projects. We want to get all the trees in the ground no later than the end of 2019. If they can be in by mid-2019, that's even better. And the reason for that is that the application that was funded by CAL FIRE that we wrote really put emphasis on maximum opportunity to maintain these trees. And so with the last funding that CAL FIRE received and that we were awarded, the grants can go up through December 2021. And so that gives a good 2.5 years to just maintain these trees during the typical 3-year establishment period. A lot of opportunity to do watering, maintenance, and so we want to get these trees in the ground as soon as possible to take advantage of the long timeline that this cycle allows for. We also upped the personnel costs. That's something we've heard from previous grantees, is that it's increasingly difficult to do the program on, say, 50% for personnel, 60%, so we've upped it another 10%. We hope that'll be a benefit to the grantees. We also increased the award limit to $75,000. Again, that's based on feedback we've had from CAL FIRE and from other current grantees. Important point here that I'm going to touch on here, and that I think we'll go into deeper detail with Green Lining Institute, and then also one of our upcoming slides, is that this is the first grant where we're utilizing the AB 1550 maps, which are a combination of Cal Enviro Screen 3 and a mapping of the low-income communities. And this is how we'll determine where your project is located and which of the qualifying categories it fits in. And the categories are statewide competition, which we have 25% of the $800,000 available for that. Disadvantaged communities per Cal Enviro screen, low-income communities per Cal Enviro screen, and then there's a small section where we'll be using 5% of our funds to identify communities located within 1/2 mile of a disadvantaged community per AB 1550. And again, there'll be more detail on that, but this is our first grant where we'll be utilizing those mechanisms. And then finally, as I mentioned here, we have a much longer timeline than we normally do for some of our grant cycles, going through 2021, allowing us 3 months to wrap up and get this submitted to CAL FIRE in March 2022. Okay, eligible projects. As I mentioned, we do really focus on tree planting, and this project's going to focus on early tree planting and then the tree establishment care. That is not to say that we don't allow for other related vegetation. We certainly try to accommodate needs for community gardens, for fruit trees. Those have been a couple of very popular items that have been integrated into the grants in the past. You'll see here that one of the tips that we're providing on this webinar is to just consider a multi-pronged proposal where you may have a real focus on the trees, but you can integrate in at maybe a lower cost some of the urban garden fruit tree components, bioswale. If you're interested in a highly engineered bioswale project, you should look at the urban greening program through California Natural Resources Agency. But the focus, again, is really going to be first and foremost on the trees, but we do want to allow for some green infrastructure. As the urban and community gardens, the CAL FIRE program and our program are the only ones that are allowing for that at this point. Eligible trees, we're going to talk a lot more about this when Kalaine comes on, but also we're really going to encourage you to read through the item that we have posted on our website, Trees for the 21st Century. This is going to give you a lot of information about how you may want to plant your trees, and also a lot of links to trees eligible through this grant application, standards and specifications, low water usage trees. So it's a great resource. We're going to continue to modify and expand on this over the coming weeks and months, but you know, it is part of the package that is posted on the website, so do take a look at it. And then you'll see here that we suggest submitting your proposed planning list early. As I said, these are due November 30th, but if you already know what trees you want to plant as you're building around the application, you can go ahead and submit your palette to us and our GHG consultant, Kalaine Rabden. We'll take a look at it and offer some thoughts on what the GHG reductions you may get out of it. And also, Amelia is a certified arborist, so she may be able to offer some tips on species if those GHG projections are coming in low. Match requirement. We always like to spend a minute on this because one of the things that we're really happy about in this program is that while we do have a 25% match, which we feel is really important to show the community engagement, we really like to see that through volunteers. As you can see, volunteers, their value in California continues to increase. Right now it's just a little over $29 an hour. Your entire match can come from volunteers. Most of the grants we're funding right now, the majority of actually all the grants we're funding right now, the majority of the match is coming from volunteers. So that, I just want to stress, that can be 100% if you don't have match components coming in terms of trees or match dollars. And you can see that, you know, the volunteer time, when it's valued at over $29 an hour, can add up pretty quick to where you only need a few volunteers each working on a project for a few hours to get to a sizable grant within our program. So, and I think we'll be talking more about volunteers later on as well. So budgeting, like I said, longer timeline on this, so plan for 2.5–3 years. We just talked about the volunteers. You know, go for it there. Typically, our grants exceed the volunteer requirement and the match category. So certainly, focus on that. But if you have other match to bring to the table, match trees are becoming increasingly common. In Los Angeles, they actually have a program that has trees that you can receive from the city as part of your project. They're also usually easier to get as a donation from organizations rather than money, so you can talk to your local nursery. Don't forget costs for replacement trees and vegetation. Again, we want to see all the trees in the ground pretty early, but we recognize that there are going to be some trees that are going to need to be replaced, at some point in the grant. And so if you factor in for those costs, that'll be something that you'll be prepared for. Direct and indirect costs, we're really pleased that this program allows for up to 10% in indirect costs in administration, and that's just overhead. And that's something where if you are awarded a grant, you won't need to demonstrate what the funds were used for. You don't need to submit receipts for it, but you do want to separate that cost from direct administration costs, which would be maybe your liability insurance or mileage for the program. But do factor in indirect costs. We encourage that for all the grants. It's an opportunity for you to capture a little bit of overhead in here that not all programs offer. Be mindful of maximums. We have maximums in the grant program. If you look through the guidelines, you'll see that we've talked already about the 70% cap on personnel. That includes a 20% cap on environmental education materials that's captured within that personnel category. We also have a maximum for signage at $500, and then individual pieces of equipment also have a maximum of $500, and then of course the 10% cap on indirect costs. So there are categories such as trees, tree supplies, direct admin costs where there are no maximums, but a lot of them do have maximums. And then this last point we wanted to add on, be realistic, is that I think everyone wants to be competitive within a grant program and when they're setting their applications, but we have had some come in where the budget simply didn't match the ambition that was put forth in the narrative, and we've talked to those grantees and realized that truthfully that project needed another $30,000–$40,000 to come to fruition. So we're here to try to help build capacity for organizations that haven't had an opportunity to utilize funds from the state in the past, and so we recognize these are small grants and the expectations reflect that. So it's okay to be realistic in terms of what you think you can accomplish with the funds that you're applying for. I think with that, I'm just going to offer a couple quick tips. One of the things that we found far too often is that applicants will skim over the guidelines and not look at some of the attachments like the Trees for the 21st Century. And certainly we have done our best to really truncate down the guidelines and application that comes from CAL FIRE in a very streamlined process. We've included a significant appendix that talks to the disadvantaged communities requirement, what we're trying to accomplish in the grant, a list of additional resources, frequently asked questions. So, that's probably about, I'd say, a 40-minute read. So read the guidelines in their in their entirety. Creating partnerships for your project. We're seeing this more and more, especially with the greenhouse gas reduction funds. CAL FIRE continues to promote this as well as the Natural Resources Agency. We love to see multi-pronged partnerships where your education component is possibly through an entity that's working in that area that you're serving. Certainly, when you're looking at vendors, we'd love to see partnerships with woman and minority-owned businesses for your trees and for your other supplies. And then in terms of the tree planting themselves, if your organization is not well-versed in tree planting, but there's a partner that you can bring on in a subcontracting capacity, that's completely acceptable as well. We have several grants that are doing that right now. And then the last one is feel free to call me. I'm generally around. We've actually reworked some staffing times so that we can be more available for this. And that's my business line, and I'm usually here to answer questions if I'm not out at the Capitol or out at a project site. So I think with that, I'm going to allow for an opportunity for some questions, and I'll rely on Amelia and Mariella to see if we have any. Okay, Mariella's telling me we have a question. The question is that you're working with a school district where some and not all of the schools are in DACs. How do we calculate whether we qualify? Oh, that's a really good question. Believe it or not, the Air Resources Board actually has a mechanism for that. They've identified what qualifies as a project within a disadvantaged community. And for urban forestry, it's very straightforward. 51% of the trees planted have to be planted within a disadvantaged community. Now that is the Air Resources Board standard. We actually set a higher bar than that. If you're going to be doing 51% of your, or I should say, if you're going to be doing 49% of your trees outside of a DAC, we're going to want to know where those trees are being planted. If they're planted within a short walking distance from a DAC, we're going to generally be comfortable with that. If they're being planted at a Title I school that's within a couple miles, we're going to be comfortable with that. Same if it's being located, if they're being planted at a local park outside a DAC. What we don't want is a project where you're meeting that minimum 51% requirement per CARB, but then the other 49% are going into a very affluent community. We don't think that's within the spirit of what the CAL FIRE program is, and subsequently ours either. So that is how you calculate that, is, see how many of your trees are going to be in those schools that are in DACs. If it's 51% and the other schools that you're planning in are Title I schools that are within a few miles, you're probably going to be okay. And of course, you can also give me a call.
Any others?
All right, that's it. So at this point, I'm going to turn this over to my colleague, Amelia Oliver, who's going to facilitate for the next hour. And she's going to pass the baton over to Colleen Rafton, who's going to discuss the tree component of the program in much more detail.
Okay, so let's get to her first slide. And Colleen, I am moving the, there you go. Colleen, you have control.
Okay, and I'm unmuted. Can everybody hear me? Can anybody hear me?
Well, you're unmuted. I hear you, so I'm going to mute myself.
All right, I got a yep from Christina. Thank you. So welcome everybody, and thanks for being here. I see a couple familiar names on the attendees list. So for those of you who've been with us for these conversations before, this is going to be pretty much a straightforward review, but hopefully it will help you to make this project even better than the ones in the past. So a quick overview of what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the planning side of things. I'm going to give you a super quick explanation of how trees reduce greenhouse gases and how we can use that to make a better project. And let me take one step back and say, your applications will be judged based on a bunch of different criteria, and I'm pretty sure that that's really clearly laid out in the guidelines. But one of the very few fully objective things is the extent to which your project reduces greenhouse gases. So California Relief has an obligation to CAL FIRE to achieve a certain level of greenhouse gas reductions, and so that's an important part of these projects. And it's an easy one for us to figure out. So this is really definitely an important thing that you want to pay attention to when we come up with these projects, and we'll work on this together. So let's talk about the planning side of things, the calculating side of things, and then some grant tips and some design advice. And then we're going to really quickly review the guidelines for 21st century plantings that was a part of that packet. So quickly, how do trees reduce greenhouse gases? There's two ways. The first way is storage, or sequestration is another word for it. Basically, trees pull carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, and through the magic of photosynthesis, use it to create tree stuff, trunks, branches, leaves, roots. So basically what that means is that if you want to sequester more greenhouse gases, bigger is better. A small flowering tree or a fruit tree, unfortunately, is going to sequester about 1/2 ton of greenhouse gases over the lifetime of this project. That's so negligible as to barely be worth thinking about. So that tree on the bottom right, which is a California live oak, in contrast, will sequester about 10 tons of greenhouse gases over the lifetime of the project. So basically, one tree planted in the ground at the size that we're going to plant them, they pretty much all cost the same amount. But over the lifetime of the project, it's going to take nearly 20 or more of these little flowering trees to equal the benefits in terms of greenhouse gases that we get from one big tree. So remember, bigger in this case is definitely better. And one reason I feel comfortable saying this and focusing so much on greenhouse gases is that all of the environmental benefits that come from trees are really related to size. So this big tree is also going to remove more air pollutants from the air. It's going to help us filter more stormwater. It's going to do a better job of shading. And it's also going to go a long way in creating sort of beautiful spaces that we would like to live in. So that's the first point. The second point, the second way that trees reduce greenhouse gases, I'm struggling with this mouse, is by reducing energy use. So if we plant a tree strategically to shade a building, and basically that's best thought of as on the west or the east side of a building, within about 60 feet, then we can significantly reduce the amount of electricity that is being used for air conditioning, especially in California. That's obviously the thing that we're thinking the most about. So, excuse me. In the hottest and driest parts of California, like in the Central Valley, the greenhouse gas benefits we're going to get from reducing energy use. So I think I skipped a step in there because I was coughing. We plant the tree, we reduce energy use. That reduces the emissions of greenhouse gas at the power plant, where we would be burning fuel to create electricity. Now that all seems very abstract. It's all so far disconnected from that tree around our house. But the truth is the benefits there can be as great as, or even bigger than, the benefits that we get from sequestration. So if you live in a hot part of California, please do not forget to include the value of shade when you're planning your project. The more we can plant trees to shade buildings in those hottest parts, the bigger our benefits are going to be. So same kind of combination there. If we take that one big oak tree that we talked about before and we plant it in a park, we need 2 of those to equal the same benefits that we would have if we were able to plant that big tree where it shades a building strategically. So again, the west is the best, the east is the next best. The south can be okay, especially when you're talking about a deciduous tree and within 60 feet of the building. And the closer is better, as long as you're keeping a safe distance from the building in terms of tree branches hitting your house and things like that. So what we would say here is we'd like to move along this spectrum from small non-shade trees to big shading trees is going to make your project as strong as it can be. So please, you're welcome to reach out to me for design advice. If you send maps and drawings of your ideas and species lists, the earlier the better, the more I can help you to improve what you've got. So I just wanted to give an example here. A couple of years ago, we received a proposal to plant, this isn't the exact thing, this is an elementary school down the street from where I used to live in San Francisco, but it's relevant. I think it reflects the standard conditions in California schools. It's a building in a giant sea of asphalt, which is an environmental nightmare. So the folks had this idea that they're going to plant 2 tiny flowering trees, essentially right in the middle of this play area. So from a design perspective, there's a lot of things wrong with that. One is that trees in the middle of a playground are not going to survive. And also we have the problem, so one thing we could do is just move them closer to the building, and then they offer a bit of a better of a framing perspective. But if we replace those 2 trees instead of 2 big trees, we get a much bigger bang for our buck. And if we replace those 2 trees with instead 6 trees, we get a wonderful visual experience. And so I have a slide here. So here is the schools from the Google Street View. It's actually kind of an attractive building. It's from the Art Deco period, but I would say most schools are not attractive, and so we wouldn't mind doing a better job of softening them up a bit. There are the 2 small flowering trees that were originally proposed in the middle of the playground. You can barely see them, and they're really not doing anything either environmentally or from a design perspective for this school. If instead we swap out those 2 and we replace them with 2 big trees, we can frame the entrance and create a more beautiful experience, and also get them off the playground where they'll be the victim of Foursquare games and basketball games and just children running into each other. But if we can replace those 2 with 6, then we get just visually just a much more wonderful experience. We have a much more healthy environment. We have all kinds of ecological benefits. So what I'm saying here is the sooner you can send me your project with your ideas, the sooner we can start to think about ways we can refine it so that we can increase the bang that we get for our greenhouse gas dollars and also from a design perspective. So early on when we started these grant projects, we asked people to calculate their greenhouse gas benefits. And that was both really a big burden for the grantees, for the applicants, and it tended to just not work very well. Now we actually have a completely new quantification method. So the long and short of it is, we will do this for you. I will do this for you. So please don't waste your time. You have much more important things to work on, and save this misery for me, because it is a little bit miserable. So what we're going to need from you is two things. One is the greenhouse gas reductions worksheet that's in your packet, and then a map showing tree planting locations. This would only really be necessary if you are able to plant your trees around buildings. If they're all going to be in the middle of a park and not provide any shade, then that map isn't so important. So here is the greenhouse gas worksheet that we have. And I'm going to go through it a little bit by little bit. So first we asked you for the species, the size of planting. We ask you if it's a shade tree, and you'll see at the bottom there's an explanation of what all of these things are. If it qualifies as a shade tree, if it's within 60 feet within 60 feet, generally speaking, of a building, and not to the north. If it does not meet those qualifications, you do not need to fill out any of the other information there. And then we ask you for the number of trees that fit that description. So I'm going to do an explanation here of what that would look like to help you figure out how to present it, because this is where we really get the crux of the matter of the greenhouse gas calculations being accurate. So we're back to our San Francisco school here. And this is, just imagine that this is the tree planting proposal. We've got a whole bunch of trees here. We're going to plant. So now here's how you figure out where your trees are. Well, I guess what I'm saying is I'm going to lay out what this looks like. So here are 9 trees planted within 20 to 40 feet to the east side of the building. There are 6 trees planted 40 to 60 feet to the east. There's 1 tree planted 20 to 40 feet to the southeast. You see how it's coming off of that corner here? I can't tell if you can see my cursor or not, but it's coming off of that southeastern corner. And then there are 5 non-shade trees that are outside of that 60 feet. So we're going to ask you back on that form, we ask you for the direction from I've made it into a sentence because it's actually pretty confusing which way to go. So the tree is to the blank of the building. And then we just need to know, is it 0 to 20, 20 to 40, 40 to 60? If it's more than 60, you don't even need to be answering these questions. So that's the breakdown that we're looking for from you. And again, if you send me the map early on, I can help you figure out what this would look like. And it can just be, I just took this map off of Google Maps. You can do that, print it out, draw some circles on it, and take a picture of it and send it to me. That's more than enough. It doesn't need to be anything fancy. So here's what that would look like if I took that tree planting project that we just showed on that map on the previous page and transferred it to the greenhouse gas worksheet. This is what it would look like. And I'm including all of this with the idea that this is kind of a packet to help you understand how to do it. So you can refer back to this presentation. You can either watch the video again, or there should be enough details in the packet that you can figure out from that how to do this. So we also made this table with how you can think about these greenhouse gas reductions and some general numbers for the kinds of values you're going to get for different species. So in the guidelines, it specifies that we're asking you to reduce at least 100 metric tons of greenhouse gases for every $10,000 in funding that you ask for. Another way to think about this that's, I think, a little bit easier maybe is we're looking for a price of about $100 a ton. So if you ask for $70,000, we're going to ask you to reduce about 700 metric tons of greenhouse gases. So the purpose of this table, of this chart here, is to just give you a sense of what your numbers are going to look like. So the top row is our values about greenhouse gas sequestration. And you can see on the left, are the trees that are going to get less than a ton of GHG reductions, and that's mostly fruit trees, your ornamental flowering trees like crepe myrtles and redbuds. And then at the other end are the big trees that will give your project a big punch, like the native pines and native oaks and, excuse me, whoops, hang on, can I go back? There we go. All right. Then same thing on the bottom, talking about how we can understand energy conservation. So there's no energy conservation values for those trees that are planted too far away and really small trees. And then the biggest bang is the large trees planted to the west of buildings within 20 feet. So this is just to generally give you an idea so you can start to do some math to get a sense of how your project is how close you're getting to that objective. So these guidelines are in your packet as well, in the Planting for the 21st Century. So I'm just going to run through them really quickly since we don't have a lot of time. Number 1, plant the biggest species possible. I think we've beaten that to death. Guideline number 2, plant trees to shade buildings when possible. So that's stuff we've already talked about, greenhouse gases. The rest of these are sort of more environmentally focused outside of greenhouse gases. So we all remember the drought, and there's no reason to expect that there's not another one looming on the horizon sometime soon. So we're asking people to choose trees with low to moderate water needs unless there are special circumstances. So there are cases where a tree is planted in a very wet area already, and then like along a riparian buffer or something like that, where it could be feasible that it would be appropriate to plant a tree that requires greater amounts of water. But CAL FIRE has been pretty clear with us that they will approve our species list, that there needs to be a heavy preponderance of low water users. This one is tricky. Select trees that have shown resiliency to pests and diseases, because the list of trees that are not plagued by pests and diseases gets smaller every year. But you certainly don't want to plant trees that you know are targeted by commonplace pests, and then they are not going to last more than a couple of years anyway. So we'd like to see you diversify your tree selection whenever possible. So this is also a buffer against pests and diseases, against drought problems, against just whatever microclimate effects you might find in your project. We're generally not going to be happy to see a proposal that just has 2 species on it. So the more that it can be diversified, the happier we're going to be about it. If it's non-diverse, then we're going to ask for a pretty strong justification for why you've chosen to plant a very small number of species. And then finally, avoid trees with a moderate or high invasive potential in your region. And we give some links in the packet for how you can get to the list of invasive species. We certainly do not want to be contributing to that problem either. And I think the last thing that I have to say is, and this is a new addition because this is a problem that we've run into a bit this last round, choose wisely and be realistic. Any changes to your species choices are going to have to be approved both by California Relief and by CAL FIRE. And the GHG target that you set in your proposal is going to have to be met. So we've seen some proposals that were for nothing but oak trees, and that scored really high in the greenhouse gas benefits. But when the time finally came, it was not possible for them to plant that many oak trees in the sites that they had identified. But so it's not that you couldn't swap out the species, but pretty much any species is going to be a drop in greenhouse gas benefits from an oak tree. So you're going to be really hard to meet your original greenhouse gas target if you have wildly overshot it. So I agree, it's a fine line here. We're asking you to get it as high as you can to be as competitive as possible, but at the same time, it needs to be realistic. If your projected planting area is a park that has no trees in it and it's 100 acres, then you probably have plenty of room for really nice, beautiful, big shade trees. If you are planting in small cutouts in a very dense part of the city, then a mid-size shade tree is probably going to be a better bet than something like Quercus agrifolia, which will be 80 feet wide by the time it's mature. So be realistic, because we're going to ask you to keep with those targets if any changes need to be made. And I don't want to go too far on that. I also want to say we know that sometimes changes have to be made. So the species you think you have access to will turn out not to be available. They'll turn out to be poor quality. So there definitely is a process in place to allow for that. It's just don't overpromise. That's what I'm saying, I guess. All right, that is it for me. I'll take any questions. So,
and you'll be on your question slide that Chuck put up for you.
Oh, well, here's the, so I'll, I didn't realize that crazy one was my question slide. There's my email address. It'll be in the packet. So feel free, again, ask me for my advice, preferably not the last 3 days before the grant proposal is due. Okay, there we go. That's me or you, one of us, or both of us. Anybody have any questions?
I don't see any questions that are typed in. Let's just give this a second. And Colleen, you were very thorough with your questions. I am going to now turn your access to this presentation off.
Okay.
And I'm going to introduce our next speaker, which is Matt Hennigan from the California Government Operations Agency. And he's going to be offering kind of an invitation to work with state agencies on planting projects. And Matt is currently muted. Are you going to, let me see if I can, Matt, are you there?
I am.
Okay, so let me move you at least ahead to your opening slide.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you. And that was an inspiring presentation. Gets me, I'm excited to work on some tree planting projects at state facilities. So just to introduce myself, I'm the sustainability deputy here at the Government Operations Agency, and I'm in charge of moving our state facilities towards meeting the sustainability goals that are laid out in the Executive Order B-1812, and also the adaptation goals in Executive Order B-3015. And I bring those up because I want to convey that state agencies are willing partners in planting trees in your communities. I know that the state government bureaucracy can be difficult to navigate, and so I want to offer my personal assistance to help you get in front of the decision makers who would help you, who could actually make a decision on using a state facility as a tree planting site. And we're motivated because we have energy use reduction goals that we're close to meeting, but we're not quite there yet. And as was mentioned, the trees save energy, right, when you plant them near buildings. We also have we have water use reduction goals. During the drought, we had great success cutting water use by replacing interior fixtures, but very little was done to replace landscaping. And in fact, folks turned their landscaping off, and we actually lost a number of trees on highway medians and at state office buildings. And these can be large and small. You've got small state office buildings like DMVs and California Highway Patrols and Employment Development Offices, in addition to the big downtown, Department of General Services owned state office buildings. So we look at these tree planting grants and these projects as an opportunity to refresh the landscaping and install some drought tolerant plants, water efficient irrigation, and really prepare our landscapes for the climate of the future. So that's what Executive Order B-3015 is about. It's about kind of adapting our infrastructure for the climate that will exist in 20 and 40 and 50 years from now, which, tree planting is a fantastic opportunity to do that. Every one of these departments have produced a roadmap on climate adaptation, and heat island effect is something that was called out specifically that they're all required to address. So, shade of asphalt areas, has a value to us, even if it doesn't necessarily show up in the calculation of energy savings. So great, you've got a willing partner in the state of California. Now, the opportunity is large. We have 1,700 state-owned facilities in all regions of California. So, don't think that if you're from a rural community, you don't have state facilities. However, it can be difficult to navigate, as I mentioned. So governance structures vary. There can be very centralized operations. So for example, Department of General Services, all the decisions get made in Sacramento, and you can find that person who you need to speak to relatively easily. On the opposite end of the spectrum is Caltrans, where very little happens at headquarters. It's all about the districts. Parks are like this too. And something like corrections, CDCR, everything's up to the warden of that particular facility. So I'm here to help, navigate that. If you have a state facility in your jurisdiction that you think could host some trees and be part of your overall plan, please don't hesitate to reach out to me as well as, the facility and the department it's in. I also want to mention there is, distinct decision-making between the executive branch, which is all the departments that I've been talking about and are in the direct control of the governor and the cabinet members of the governor's cabinet. The UC system has a completely different setup. So I can't necessarily help you with that. California State University system, and also the judicial branch if you have a county courthouse. I'm sure they're receptive, but they're not really in our chain of command. So reach out to them. There are CSUs and courthouses in disadvantaged communities. I'm sure they'll be receptive, but just know it may from the outside seem like one state monolith, but there are some important distinctions in there. So just last couple of slides, I want to give you an example of a few state facilities where I think we could use some trees. So this is a bird's eye view of a Caltrans district office in Stockton. This is in a disadvantaged community. And if you look at that photograph, you'll see a lot of turf area along the front, around the front of the building that looks like it says B Street there. So from a drought and water conservation perspective, I'd love to see that turf just torn out and replaced with drought tolerant plantings. And a lot of those plantings can be the large trees that sequester carbon that are encouraged by this program. I'd also point to the strip of small shrubs along MLK Boulevard there. Those could easily be replaced. And in fact, you can see one or two large trees already planted in that strip. Maybe not extremely large, but there's opportunities like that. I've seen a lot of state facilities that were originally designed with trees in the parking lot where the trees have died and been removed. So there are tree wells out there with irrigation already out there with no tree in them. Here's another one. I toured this facility with our local tree planting nonprofit here in Sacramento. This is a California Highway Patrol station. It's also in a disadvantaged community. And after our walkthrough, they identified room for about 8 or 10 large trees. And you can see what I'm talking about. There's kind of tree well cutouts in the parking lot where there's no tree or there's no large tree. And there's small shrubs that could easily be replaced with a large tree or medium-sized tree. So, you folks are the tree experts. We're not. So it's unlikely that we're going to take on these kind of re-landscaping projects on our own. And really one of the reasons I got engaged with California Relief and this grant project is because during the drought, we had a lot of trouble finding funding for landscaping projects. And I think this is a vehicle to get that work accomplished that may just be more practical and quicker to move than trying to move through state budget processes for something like re-landscaping state facilities. There's always competing priorities. And I know we all know that this is important, but it is a tough and slow moving process for us to get budget for re-landscaping state buildings. So my last statement here is that partnering with state agencies is never easy. Let me help you. So this is my direct contact information. It's not that these folks necessarily report to me, but I can help you navigate the bureaucracy and find the right people who can sign those partnership documents with you. So I don't want to take any more of your time today, but I hope that you'll, keep an eye out for state facilities in your community. We have a list of state facilities in disadvantaged communities posted on the Relief website. I understand that from the presentation that the guidelines have changed and now low-income communities are included with that. I'll work with my GIS team, the graphic information folks, geographic information folks, to update that list so we get you a comprehensive list of state facilities that are eligible for this grant. And I hope you'll give us a look when you're looking for sites to host trees. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't see any questions typed in. I hope that they will contact you directly. I am going to turn the mouse over to Emmy Wang. She's from Green Lining Institute, and she will be sharing another important aspect of these grants, which is the community engagement and social justice aspects of tree planting. So let me move us ahead to your opening slide, Emmy. Are you, let me unmute you as well. Hold on.
Great, I'm on.
Okay, you are on.
Perfect. Well, thanks so much. And yeah, again, my name is Emmy Wang, and I work with a policy and advocacy organization called the Green Lining Institute. And I'm here to talk about the social equity aspects of this grant, which is called the Social Equity Tree Planting Grant. So first, just a definition on terms. There are a lot of definitions of social equity out here. For the purposes of this presentation and just a framework, we define social equity as the fair and just distribution of both societal burdens and societal benefits. This matters, of course, because we know that the society and world in which we live in is one in which these benefits and burdens haven't, in fact, been distributed equally. And so I work in an organization called Green Lining, which is called that because we were formed as a response to systemic redlining practices, which excluded and literally drew red lines around communities of color to exclude communities of color and individuals of color from economic opportunities. We also know that we live in a world where, because of historical and systemic practices like redlining and environmental racism, that the climate catastrophe, right, this warming planet and the impact that it has on all of us, does hit low-income and communities of color first and worst. This is so evident with trees. If we walk around our neighborhoods and walk around our communities, it's very clear that often the most kind of barren communities, the communities with the least tree cover and green infrastructure and just the life that trees bring are often our poorest and most marginalized neighborhoods. So just to set a little context in terms of kind of the statewide approaches to address some of these disparities, and other folks before me have touched on this, but I just wanted to briefly draw your attention to what we call the Callan Virus Screen tool, which is the first tool in the country to measure cumulative burdens of both poverty and pollution. So Callan Virus Screen looks at 12 pollution and 8 socioeconomic characteristics and indicators to ultimately determine the top 25% of communities that are identified as disadvantaged, meaning they're the most burdened. And you can see those on the left. Those are the communities in the census tracts in the red. One of the uses of Callan Virus Screen is to target funding. And so Chuck touched on this briefly. But there's a piece of policy that we worked on called AB 1550, which kind of directs the expenditures of money from the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. So under AB 1550, a minimum of 25% of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund has to go to projects that are located within disadvantaged communities, plus an additional 10% to benefit low-income households and communities. CAL FIRE and California Relief, as you have both heard earlier in this presentation, have gone even further than those minimums. So recognizing that our most impacted communities really require the most resources, 75% of this grant will be awarded to projects following AB 1550 minimums. So what that means is 25% of the grant is open for statewide competition, and the rest of the 75% is either targeted to projects located within disadvantaged communities or low-income communities and households. And to learn more about that specific breakdown, I believe there's more information on page 2 of the grant guidelines for this grant. So that's a little bit of just kind of the state infrastructure. And I wanted to talk a little bit about this question, operationalizing equity. Equity has become, I think, a little bit of a buzzword recently, so much so that in many cases I feel like it loses its meaning, it's unclear kind of what it means, and folks might have good intentions, and the ultimate outcome of a project or a program might not actually be equitable in its impacts. And so we've been thinking a lot about how to operationalize equity and how to make sure that equity is foundational to the projects and the programs that we carry out. So we offer this framework on four equity categories that we think are crucial to, as you're kind of going through your project and kind of devising your project vision, to keep these categories in mind, right? So goals, values, mission, process, programs, project services, and analysis and measurement. In each of these kind of categories and timeline pieces, how are you describing equity as a value of your project? How are you, through your project process, including people, bringing people to the table, and proposing to really focus on equity? How, through your outcomes, right, your programs, projects, and services, are you leading to equity outcomes? And then ultimately, how are you measuring the progress on equity, right? We can measure the progress on greenhouse gases. We can measure the progress on, the decrease in urban heat island effect. If equity is foundational to your project, then in the same way, your equity outcomes must also be measured. So that's just a little bit of a framework. And then I want to offer here just some tips for kind of ways in which we see this being most relevant for the California Relief Social Equity Tree Planting Grant. So there are three things, and they're pretty simple, and I assume most people on this phone are pretty familiar. And it's we really want to see through your application and as you devise your project vision, how you're thinking about community engagement, how you're thinking about maximizing and layering multiple cumulative benefits, and then paying particular attention to the economic and workforce development benefits that your project might be able to provide. So let's start with community engagement, which, again, I assume and hope that everyone on this call are familiar with, but just to go through it a little bit, community engagement and active community engagement and leadership of folks within your neighborhood are foundational to your tree planting project. Through meaningful community engagement, we can address priority community needs in a way that provides significant benefits, significant environmental, public health, and economic benefits, while also avoiding unintended harms. So what we want to see as you're going through your application is how your project is building community and how your project is engaging neighbors, residents, community groups, youth, actively throughout the whole project, through both implementation, but also planning. An urban forestry project is a great opportunity to kind of meet your neighbors, like get a sense of who's working in your neighborhood. That community engagement piece is super foundational, especially because, as we all know, for trees, the maintenance and stewardship of trees is so important and so dependent on having and cultivating and developing real community stewards, so that from the time you plant your trees to the end of the 3-year period of the grant and beyond, you are really cultivating community stewards who are able to take over the maintenance and active care of your trees. Two just quick things on this particular grant, and that Chuck touched on a little bit, is that all your projects should include an educational component, meaning how are you thinking about kind of educating your neighbors about the benefits of trees, the specific trees that you are planting, ways in which they can engage and get involved. And then, of course, you are highly encouraged to meet your 25% match requirement with volunteer support. And then lastly is, thinking about the kinds of different partnerships that you can make, not only with individuals, but also with other local community groups or kind of unconventional allies. I think we've been, reviewing the grants, I think we've been most impressed by those projects that really build on community strengths and engage a wide cross-section of different groups. That really shows to us that this project is something that really comes from community members and seems to have a lot of buy-in from lots of different folks. So here is just an example. I pulled this from a previous grant application from 2017, from a grant that was ultimately successful, and this is taken directly from their narrative, from their application. and it's about them explaining their community engagement efforts. And so a couple things really stood out to me here, and which is why I pulled it. It's one, it's very clear that engagement and organizing is kind of interwoven throughout their project vision. And with that, it's ongoing, right? They talk about ongoing engagement, they talk about engagement at the very beginning, but it's clear that it's an ongoing activity. And I think the other thing that impressed me about this was they really described multiple touch points and multiple ways of getting in touch and involving folks. So there's surveying, canvassing, interviews, presentations, bilingual services, trainings, volunteer days. And it's just very evident, kind of reading through this whole application that encompassing as many community members as possible was a key kind of goal and vision for this application, and is along the lines of what we would love to see from your own applications. Okay, moving on to multiple benefits. So, another key part of the grant is that we're doing much more than just tree planting. In addition to reducing greenhouse gases, we also want you to think about the other benefits and impacts that can be carried out through this grant, and really how your project is connecting to larger issues and needs in your community. Part of this is that over the years as an advocacy organization, we have encouraged the state agencies who administer these grants to really kind of reward those projects that are able to demonstrate multiple benefits. And so that means that as an applicant, in order for your project to be successful, in addition to all the straight GHG benefits, we really are looking to see those other angles around kind of, improved air quality, stormwater management, mitigation of urban heat island effect, overall quality of life impacts, as well as workforce and economic development. And we really want to see the linkages between important community needs that you have identified and how those needs are being addressed through your project and the benefits that your project is creating. So again, here's an example from a different grantee. This is from last year. And what I liked about this is they explicitly kind of pulled out and teased out the multiple ways in which they see trees benefiting their neighborhood. So they're talking about, reducing the urban heat island effect, to preparing for climate impacts, to just kind of the general quality of life impacts that the project will bring. And in other parts of the application that I didn't excerpt here, they also talk specifically about employing 6 student workers and the importance of kind of providing training in kind of conservation and greening spaces when often those spaces don't reflect their own community. So they really took kind of a multifaceted approach and were able to demonstrate that through the application. So kind of going off of that, the last kind of thing I want to touch on is this question of economic benefits, and it's a multiple benefit, it's a co-benefit that we really want to stretch. And the reason for this is because through your project, and particularly your employment and procurement practices, there's a real opportunity to contribute economically to your local community. We want to plant trees and keep the benefits of trees in the neighborhood, but we also want to keep the economic benefits within the neighborhood. We know that across the state, the tree care industry is currently facing a shortage of skilled tree care workers. And we also know that in many of our communities, jobs are a real need, right? So through your project, we would love for you to be thinking about how could your project introduce your neighbors to trees and tree care? Are there internships or stipend projects or kind of educational training projects that you could offer over the course of the season to youth or students? And then to prepare the site, cut concrete, and engage in long-term maintenance, how can your project provide sustained paid work for members who live or work within your community? That's kind of the workforce side, but there's also a side on economic development, right? There's also significant opportunity to give back beyond just training and jobs and through your contracting and procurement practices. So we encourage you, if you're like buying any supplies, contracting for any services, to maximize that contracting and procurement from local businesses that are located within disadvantaged and low-income communities, and minority and women-owned businesses, right? So that the economic benefits of this project are also staying within the community. So lastly, here's just an example. This is from another project from 2018. In which they explicitly, had providing jobs as an explicit goal of the project vision. So it's just a really clear example of how this project or this grantee is providing both youth internship opportunities. I mean, I think they said they were offering 28 paid environmental education internships, as well as working with local contractors for some of the longer term maintenance and the concrete cutting for this project. So I think that's the end. Yes, that's the end of my presentation. So thank you for the time. And yeah, I mean, we see these as, just to sum up, we see these as really exciting community tree planting projects. Encourage you to think all about all the ways that you can maximize what it means for those projects to come from your community and ultimately benefit your community in a multiplicity of ways. So my contact information is here if you have any questions. I think this is also the time for formal questions here, so I'll just leave it and see if we have any questions.
I did want to remind everyone, if they do have questions, please type them into the question box there, and we will, all the organizers will be able to see them. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to enter those. And, oh, we'll go to the left side too, hold on. So, and then Chuck is back here too. So if you did have a question for Chuck or for any of the other presenters today, there's a question here that the presentations, whether they'll be shared or not, and they are being recorded and will be up probably later this afternoon. And there is a handout available on there as well that has the PowerPoint slides. And there's a thank you there. Chuck, did you want to say anything at the end here?
No, just we really appreciate everyone's time. We're really looking forward to this cycle. We think it's a great opportunity to get trees in the ground early and maximize the opportunity to maintain them. Really appreciative to CAL FIRE for allowing this kind of grant to go forward with so much emphasis on the need to maintain our trees. We're hoping that as the program continues, we'll be able to broaden it to include opportunities to maintain the existing urban forest. That's a hurdle we continue to deal with, especially with the Air Resources Board. But I want to thank all the presenters that have generously taken their time to be on today. So thanks again to Ernie. We're really excited to have Amelia on board. She's going to be a fantastic resource as well. And like she may have been, so we're going to field that as well.
Okay, a community member in Southern California disadvantaged area, and they don't have money or enough staff. How do the community members get things done? It's a loaded question. So I mean, San Diego is kind of interesting. There are a lot of groups and nonprofits and things that get projects going in Southern California.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of our first grants in the very first cycle of this in 2016 was with Tree San Diego, and they relied on partnering with the Urban Corps of San Diego and obviously a large volunteer network to do trees in, I believe, 4 parks throughout San Diego. 3 of them were in disadvantaged areas, and 1 was just outside. So, I mean, those opportunities do exist. And again, that's, I think, the benefit of this kind of program is that we are not asking for additional funds to be brought to the table. We're supplying the funds. We're simply asking that the community engagement be authentic, and from that should come community participation in the form of volunteers, which could help expedite and move the program forward. I mean, that's kind of the best advice I could give. You could also contact Tree San Diego to they might be able to offer additional information on how they've been successful in their grants.
Yes, and if you'd like to or any staff at California Relief. Any other questions? I don't see any more coming in.
Okay, well, we are absolutely fine to give everyone 20 minutes of their life back. So again, thank you so much for participating. Look for the recorded version later on today, and of course you can contact us. But apparently we caught the attention of someone with a final last question.
It's the same. It's about San Diego. I think that's going to take a conversation directly with Britt on whether community members can apply for grants.
So typically what we've seen is, and we highlight this in the guidelines, is that we do want to offer these grants to nonprofits, community benefit organizations. One of the things that we're really excited about is that you don't have to be a 501c3 if you can find a fiscal sponsor, and a fiscal sponsor can be another NGO. So if you want to partner with someone like Urban Corps or Tree San Diego or Balboa Park Conservancy or some of those other entities in San Diego, they don't even need to be an urban forestry group. Then community members that have organized under a community benefit organization banner can apply for the funds. But in terms of just a handful of community members that just live in a particular neighborhood wanting to apply for the funds, you'd want to have a little more structure and work through a community benefit organization or an established nonprofit to move forward your application.
Okay. Great.
Okay. Hey, thanks again to everyone for joining, and we look forward to seeing some applications